Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Carolina Perez.
Hi, Carolina.
Hi, Carolina
Morning,
Perez.
Jason.
Good morning.
Hi, Matt Schuster.
Hi, Matt. Nice to meet you.
Matt Schuster.
Morning, Matt. Patrick Doyle.
Hi, Patrick.
Morning, Patrick Doyle.
John Wilson.
Hi, John. Nice to meet you.
John Wilson.
Morning, John.
Well, thank you both for being here with us this morning. As I said, my name is Carolina Perez. With me, I have John Wilson, Pat Doyle, and Matt Schuster. And today we'll be presenting to you our strategy for Crane Co. to see growth through adding value to their valve industry. So a little bit about our agenda today. I'll first walk you through the assignment as well as the overview of Crane Co. and its different segments. I'll follow that up by digging deeper into the fluid handling segment, follow that up with our recommendation, and then Matt will give us a little bit more information about CIRCOR International. We'll learn who they are as we get to that. Patrick will walk us through the financial impact of our recommendations, and then John will come in and wrap it up with our strategic approach, as well as our risks and our conclusion. So a little bit about our assignment today. Our client is Crane Co. They are a conglomerate that sees growth and has a strong footprint in multiple sectors and multiple segments. And the challenges that we saw today, that we saw with this assignment, were to provide or to discover new growth opportunities for Crane Co. Additionally, we wanted to make sure that we delivered above average EPS growth and strengthened their current cash flow. Now, the way that we found these challenges could be addressed were with opportunities to organically grow Crane Co. Excuse me, with operational improvement, as well as increase their market share in a specific market that we'll discuss in a bit, and see cost reduction from acquisition savings. So let's talk about where those opportunities really lie. As I mentioned, Crane Co. has a footprint in multiple segments. They divide their business into 4 main segments, which you see above. What we wanted to do is do an analysis of each segment and see where the greatest growth or the greatest impact for growth could lie. And the first segment that we looked at was engineering materials. Now, engineering materials only accounts for 8% of Crane Co.'s revenue. So we felt that the data showed that we had to have more impact than that. So we eliminated this segment from the table. The next segment that we looked at was the PMT segment, Payment and Merchandising Technologies. And because of Crane Co.'s acquisition of Crane Currency last year, the data showed that this segment was already set up for substantial growth over the next few years. The same could be said for the aerospace and electronics. According to Crane Co.'s strategic overview that was presented at their Investor Day back in March, this segment is set to increase sales up to north of $1 billion over the next decade. So again, we thought that they were set up for substantial growth, which brings us to the fluid handling segment. According to our analysis, this is the area that has the most room for operational margin and profit improvement, and it's the basis for our recommendation today. So a little bit about that fluid handling segment. Currently, the fluid handling segment of Crane Co. accounts for $125 million of their profit and a 12% operating margin. This is slightly lower than the other 2 main components of Crane Co.'s revenues, or profits, which are anywhere between 150 to 160 million and 20 to 21% in operating margin. This segment accounts for $1 billion in net sales annually, but more importantly, it gives us opportunities in many diversified end markets, in that the fluid handling valve industry really involves anywhere from food processing to oil and gas, as well as other end markets. Now, I want to point out specifically that within fluid handling at Crane Co., about 93% of this segment is made of their industrial valve sales. So we took a deeper dive into that industrial valve industry to see what the trends were. The Markets and Markets Research Report predicts that by 2023, the market size will have grown to $73 billion with a 4.6% annual compounded annual growth rate. Additionally, in this the first quarter of 2018 alone, we saw 26 acquisitions. This is second only to the 27 acquisitions that we saw in quarter 3 of 2014. And the reason I point out these acquisitions is that the market for this valve industry is really highly consolidating right now, and your 2 options are basically to buy or be bought. which leads to our actual recommendation. We recommend that Crane Co. acquire CIRCOR International to deliver earnings growth of $1.89 per share, as well as increase their free cash flow by $55 million. I'll now hand it over to Matt, who will walk us a little deeper through our recommendation.
Thank you, Katz. So as she mentioned, there is a high level of consolidation within this industry, and because of it, we wanted to find companies that made sense for Crane to acquire. And so we've given you 4 companies that are competitors of Crane that we felt could possibly make sense. So we analyzed those in a decision matrix looking at 4 main factors. The 4 factors were: 1, global markets. Would this company's acquisition mean that Crane as a whole was expanding its presence worldwide? 2nd, synergies. Was this a company that we felt its business dealings would fit in well with Crane's? Would we want to acquire it? Would we be able to easily work it into Crane's operations? 3rd, does the deal size make sense? Meaning, even if everything else lines up, is this a realistic deal that Crane can make? Could we acquire this company based on their business size and what type of business they do? And then finally, stepping back from the numbers a second, does this deal align with the values of Crane? Even if everything else makes sense, is this the type of company we want to work with? Is this a company that's principles align with ours? Given all of that analysis, we found that CIRCOR met all 4 of these, and while some other companies presented great opportunities, this one clearly stood above the rest. So given that, let's dive a little bit more into CIRCOR International and what exactly that company does and what exactly its numbers show. So CIRCOR International's business is divided into 2 main areas: energy and advanced flow systems. Energy dealing mostly in the gas and oil industry, and then advanced flow systems dealing mostly in the aerospace and engineering sectors. These 2 segment revenues are $322 million and $268 million respectively. However, the way their business is divided up is a little bit different than Crane's, and we feel that most of those revenues could actually fit into the fluid handling segment of Crane. While theirs is divided up by industries, ours is divided up based on what the actual operation is, in this case, fluid handling, specifically valves. However, because a lot of that dealing that CIRCOR does falls into aerospace, us also having an aerospace division, we believe there's even more growth opportunity than we'll be presenting today, but we'd like to focus on the bulk of their business dealings, which would fall into that fluid handling and valve area. Furthermore, we wanted to look at what competitors does CIRCOR have. The first being obviously ourselves, Crane. The second, however, being Colfax, a company that in 2017, Crane recently acquired for $855 million. What this means is not only are we going to be receiving the benefits of CIRCOR, but also the benefits of acquiring Colfax, which is now a part of Crane, making this deal even more lucrative for Crane as a company to acquire. So moving into the numbers for CIRCOR, moving to the data a little bit deeper, we see they have a market cap of $966 million, a number that Patrick will touch on a little bit later. Furthermore, looking at where they're located, they have 15 locations in North America, 16 in Europe, and perhaps most importantly, 6 in the Southeastern Asia market. We'll get into why that's important a little bit later, but that area is one particularly that Crane needs to focus in. Furthermore, we'll see an immediate $1 billion increase in sales, something obviously beneficial to our financials. And then finally, diving back into those values a little bit more, we see that CIRCOR really focuses on growth, both through organic growth as well as through strategic acquisitions, something that aligns with Crane's values perfectly. So we see this as not only a good fit, but a deal that would be beneficial for Crane if we were to acquire CIRCOR. What all this would lead to is an EPS of $4.78 and a free cash flow of $360 million. 2 numbers that are very important to what the overall goal of today's assignment was. Now, diving back into that growth and expansion a little bit more, what we have here is a map of where CIRCOR's current operations are. They have 15 locations in North America, 16 in Europe, and 6 in the Southeastern Asia market. This would pair with the 44 locations that we currently have in the Americas, the 12 locations we have in Europe, and 9 in the Asia Pacific region. Now, I mentioned specifically that Asia Pacific region, which would almost be doubling and why it's important. This is because according to Exxon, we're going to see a 25% increase in global demand in energy by 2040, but specifically a 40% increase in energy demands in China and India by 2040. What we see is when energy increases, as well as when population and urbanization increases, which is happening at a rapid pace in that Southeast Asia region, we see that our business actually grows. And this is because the need for valves, both in the energy industry, in the water and wastewater industry, and even more, such as food, such as paper, any of those industries where any of these valves are needed is going to drive up business in the valve industry, and we're going to be a stronger player in that valve industry. So the more we grow our presence in that region now, the better off we'll be positioned long term. To dive a little bit more into the financials, I'm now going to turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, Matt. So here I'm going to talk about not only the synergies that we see between the merger of the two companies, but also the overall purchase and strategy we feel behind that. Going in depth, with mergers and acquisitions, there are typically three types of synergies that we focus on. There would be revenue synergies above expected projection in terms of sales for both companies. You would also see supply chain optimization synergies, but more specifically, the one that is most confident in being realized from previous data would be the SG&A synergies within a company. And that's when they merge and consolidate like positions within companies. But in previous acquisitions of Westlock Controls in 2017, Crane realized $25 million in synergies from that acquisition alone, purely from SG&A. Looking over the lifetime value of that, that would add $281 million of total NPV synergies. This is the one that would be most likely to be realized, especially with this current acquisition. Westlock was a company with annual sales of $32 million, and Circor is $1 billion. So this value here would be the absolute minimum that would be realized. And using this value, we move forward to calculate our total EPS of $4.78 estimated for 2018, an increase to our cash flow of $55 million, and also a total free cash flow for 2018 of $360 million. That is above our current 2017 amount of $269 million. So I spoke also of the two other types of synergies that we could see. That would be supply chain optimization and revenue synergies. For supply chain optimization, as Matt spoke, we're adding locations, we're adding global opportunities with Circor, and you would see not only benefits in terms of how we operate, but added sales that we'd see from those various acquisitions. The problem with this is it's a little bit harder to quantify because historically every merger is different, and so looking at past acquisitions, you can't say specific increase in revenue or specific % decrease in supply chain. So using our, in order to come up with the overall financial impact and the positive benefits that we would see from this merger, we accounted for only the $25 million synergy from SG&A. So looking at the overall stock purchase, we were recommending stock specifically because it is a beneficial way to ensure that Circor and its shareholders remain invested in the company and actually see long-term growth, because as we perform as an overall entity, Circor will gain more value instead of just a cash deal. So looking more in depth at those financials, Circor's current market value is $966 million. They would not accept anything below what the market says they're worth. Historically, premiums range between 10%, and that is seen in the Westlock Controls acquisition of 2017. So the overall value we're suggesting will be a little bit north of $1 billion. So for this stock purchase and in taking into account that 10% premium, we determined that an exchange ratio of 1 Circor share for 0.6 Crane shares would be the ratio that we'd use, and this would create 12 million new shares to give us a total of 72 million. The overall entity combined would be $6.4 billion before any of the synergies that we said with SG&A are added in. Circor would gain 17% of this new entity, and one of the things we wanted to stress was any value at risk for our current shareholders with Crane. Specifically, there would only be 1.8%. Now, that value, to get a little more in depth, is just the total value of Crane before any merger. We took the premium that we would have to pay, so in terms of how much of our value would we have to pay to acquire Circor. So only less than 2% of what shareholders currently own would be at risk, which is very minimal in this case. To go over other risks and mitigations for those risks, I'm going to pass it on to John.
Thank you, Pat. So I'm going to walk you through some of the risks that are inherent to this potential merger. And I'm going to walk you through the mitigation strategies that our team suggests that Crane Co. used to overcome these risks and provide value to both our shareholders and to the Circor shareholders. So to get started, the biggest risk that this entire merger faces is the overall demand for the oil and gas market. The valve industry is heavily reliant on this demand, and in recent years, this market has not performed well. While analysts forecast that this demand is expected to increase heavily in the near future, we wanted to figure out what happens if that does not come to fruition. So we decided to analyze the historical performance of both Crane Co. and CircWork. We realized that Crane Co. actually has very strong historical performance through both the 2009 Great Recession and the more recent oil price depression. And what's more interesting about this specific acquisition is that CircWork also holds those very strict operational standard of excellence. CircWork provides products to a very niche market, and this particularly is important because these customers are highly reputable, and they have moved towards a more variable cost structure with their product offering. So in times with decreased demand, that means they can simply throttle back production and not have a looming high fixed cost on their balance sheet they need to supply for. So this really helps us in times of low demand, stay flexible, and make sure that we're not losing our margins. And over the history of Crane Co., margins have never dropped below 10% through both of those times of economic downturn, which is very important for Crane Co. as a whole. As we keep cash in our company, we no longer have to sacrifice our profit margin. Moving forward, the other biggest issue for this particular deal is the acquisition that CircWork had for Colfax. CircWork took on a substantial amount of debt. They need to realize the synergies that will come to fruition from this acquisition. Now, how do you incentivize a company after they get bought to actually play ball and make sure that they're going to dig in deep and recognize those synergies? Well, as Pat mentioned before, we're going to make sure that we pay them in stock so that they still have skin in the game, and they're going to work hard to recognize that return for their shareholders and the Crane Co. shareholders. Now, this is very important because if we simply pay them in cash, they have zero incentive and they can walk away from the deal. So that's something that's going to be a strong non-negotiable on our behalf to make sure that we bring CircWork to the table. And the fundamental issue here is, what do we do if CircWork does not want to be purchased, which is very possible as they're a high growth trajectory company. They just made their own acquisition. And how do we actually make sure that they realize that this is going to be beneficial for both of us? Well, with a company like Crane's size and current debt capacity, something like a hostile takeover or a leveraged buyout might be an option. That's not how we play ball here at Crane. According to our founder, R.T. Crane, the corporate resolution states that we seek to conduct business with the highest integrity possible. We need to make sure that we conduct business fairly for not only our customers, but also with our competitors like CircWork. So we're going to do that by actually illustrating to CircWork how this deal is mutually beneficial for the long-term value of both of our companies. So why does this make sense as a strategic approach for CircWork? Well, CircWork has two glaring holes in the business model currently. In 2018, their CFO announced that he was departing. Despite an exhaustive search with executive staffing firms, they have yet to fill that role. This is something that Crane Co. can actually come in immediately and fill that gap in their management team. Saves them money over time, some of those SG&A synergies, and it's something that they drastically need, as they will no longer have the SEC obligations to have a CFO reporting to the SEC when they roll into our stock options. The other big issue for CircWork currently is their debt obligation. As I mentioned before, when they acquired Colfax, they have a substantial amount of debt. While they do have very strong cash flow, they will not be able to pay down that debt for at least another 4 years. And according to their strategic initiatives of trying to grow through strategic acquisitions, that means they're not going to participate in the future of this industry roll-up. And that's a big problem for them strategically, and something that we can help with by providing a higher or more access to debt. So Crane Co. has a bigger capacity to hold debt and the opportunity to increase their credit rating and restructure their current debt outstanding. This is also very important for the operational aspects of Crane Co. So Crane Co., we looked at their historical inventory, and we realized that we can provide operational excellence and some of the industry knowledge to actually increase the inventory turnover ratio at CircWork by over 50%. Now, this is something that will happen over time. There are potential revenue synergies, as Pat mentioned before. So in conclusion, what will this current company look like? We recommend that you're going to buy CircWork for a $1 billion stock transaction. It's going to increase sales immediately to $1 billion in value and a $6.4 billion market cap. And we're going to recognize both Crane Co.'s management goals of providing an increase of $55 million in cash flow, increasing earnings per share to $4.78, and overall increasing that by 2021 to a 22% increase over the peer average. Thank you. We welcome any questions.
Okay. What is our current market share in this business, and what is CIRCOR's current market share?
So the overall business, so this would be in terms of sales. So if we could go and look at just the overview of the fluid handling segment, we would have $73 billion in total sales. And so we would have from Crane about $5 billion, and then CIRCOR would add an additional $1 billion. So looking at that $6 billion over the 73, we'd be looking at around 8% total sales market share.
All right. And of that, do you get the sense of how different or similar their customer profiles look? Meaning, are those customers multi-sourcing, buying some of their valves from us and some from them? Or is it completely different customer sets and we're going to have to break in and take those customers back, or potentially those customers may be at risk from a competitor coming in due to an acquisition? What is the differentiation between their customers and ours?
So overall, the customers are pretty much in the same industries, but and a lot of similar customers. But for one of the instances that Matt actually talked about was with the aerospace side of the fluid handling, we would actually, our products are more the seats, the landing gear. They have all of the actual fluid systems within the planes themselves. So while a lot of the valves and pumps within the industry, we are selling similar products to similar customers. We would actually gain some synergies by just adding the ability to go further into the aerospace and other fluid handling in terms of that flow system for the planes. And we counted that into the fluid handling because by their definition, that is fluid handling. Even though it is on a plane, it's all flow for the water, the oil, the gas within the plane itself.
And then an additional detail to that is when looking at the customer bases of the two, also looking at the locations that I mentioned and how we don't currently have the strongest presence in Europe and in the Southeastern Asia region. We have 44 locations in the Americas, so we're very strong there, but we would be expanding into areas where we currently aren't the strongest, where we have a presence, but not the biggest presence. And so by doing that, we would also see growth in those areas as well, to add on to what Pat said about the industries as well.
Thanks for running us through the risks and mitigation strategy. Did you all look at anything as far as bringing the two companies together? What sort of challenges we might see from an operations perspective or from a human capital perspective?
Yeah, so do you want to talk about that as well?
Sure. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's a human capital aspect to this merger. But what we found, as John touched upon a little bit, is that CIRCOR has a need almost for a stronger leader in the industry to guide them in their management. One of their biggest challenges, as you mentioned, is that in August of this year, their CFO decided to step down, and he agreed to stay on until they found a successor, but we are reaching year's end, they have yet to find that. We have strong management at Crane Co, so we believe that that's one of the reasons that CIRCOR would want to come over. Now there is in CIRCOR's acquisition of Colfax, they accounted for $150 million in pension liabilities within that deal, so that is something that we could consider, in case we had to lay some people off. Now I do want to point out, obviously that is an additional cost, but through the strategic overview presented at Crane Co, there is excessive room in, I guess you could call, our available funds to acquire a company that would give us that leeway for any of those additional human capital costs.
So building on that a little bit, I think one of the things you talked about is we would provide them with a CFO. How how do you bring the companies together? Do you envision us really propagating some of our management in their organization? Do we mostly keep them intact? Like, what does that look like?
So this would have to be a full integration in order to actually recognize some of those operational synergies. So bringing our highly engineered supply chain teams and bringing them to a seat at the table. We obviously can't move all the physical locations. They're all throughout Southeast Asia. So all those locations would tend to stay open. The idea would be to share learnings across both companies.
And to add to that, being that, as Matt mentioned, a lot of these regions are almost doubling in locations. It could be feasible that we maybe have a second C-suite manager to handle the global markets versus the Americas, since those numbers will be growing. There is the opportunity to possibly have some of their management stay on board.
Oh, we got 10 more minutes.
Oh, we get 10 more.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Not. I got one. So what do we do? All right. So let's say hypothetically they agree. Is there any sort of execution plan here in terms of what we actually do going forward to operationalize this and recognize these synergies? Because a lot of your financial benefit is predicated on us being able to capture these synergies across the categories you mentioned. Like, what do we have to do to actually make that happen?
So for implementation, so the synergies that we specifically touched on were just the SG&A. So with this acquisition and looking at Westlaw controls, which we acquired in the past year, kind of as a guideline, we would go forth and we would perform the stock purchase in terms of issuing the new shares, getting their approval in 2018 at the very early start. But the SG&A synergies would come pretty much instantaneously because we would go through the process within the first quarter. You would have to combine, you would have to get rid of any light positions moving forward. We didn't account for any revenue or supply chain synergies because historically those are the hardest to realize. There are revenue projections that you could make, but there's no substantial data to support those. So we didn't include those in determining long-term what synergies would be added. So we just focused on within early next year when we combine the two companies, what synergies would be added purely from SG&A costs.
To add to that, we also ran a sensitivity analysis on what the different levels of synergy could look like. And as we see, even with just 10 million in synergies, which we would assume is not the case, since as you mentioned, Westlock was a $32 million company in sales, and CERCOR is $1 billion. We see a positive growth, even at the lowest of synergies. But as we mentioned, in those that we can't exactly quantify, like revenue synergies and supply chain optimization, assuming that there would be higher synergies.
Yeah, I get that. I'm more thinking like, what are the first 3 or 4 things that we need to do once the trigger's been pulled to get that? I understand sensitivity, but like operationally, what do we have to do?
So the very first thing that we need to do is actually get in touch with the CERCOR management team. And that's not going to be an insignificant task because of the missing CFO currently. Their management team is extremely busy rolling up this Colfax acquisition. So in order to actually come to the table with them, we're going to have a very, very compelling case and show them the money up front. So we need to actually come to the table with this presentation of why does this make sense for them in order to even get them interested in this opportunity.
Why would it make sense for them?
So that was the slide that John touched upon towards the end of the presentation, sort of highlighting some of the things that CERCOR does now that we can improve upon, specifically that operational excellence. The turnover rate, he mentioned that 50% increase. Essentially what that means is the time that their goods are sitting in the warehouse is a lot longer than ours. Ours are getting out of the warehouse and out to customers a lot quicker. That's because of our operations being a more efficient operation than what they have. He mentioned that obviously the departure we've talked about, the debt level restriction that they no longer would have being a part of Crane. And then again, with them having skin in the game, with them having the shares of Crane, the better that Crane performs, the more money that those stakeholders are then sitting upon as our value continues to rise. So those are all incentives for them to not only take the deal, but for them to help us see that deal out and make sure that the company continues to perform well from here going forward.
So you've hit on the importance of making a compelling value proposition to them, but things happen, right? So let's say this deal falls through for whatever reason, regulatory or I don't know, right? It breaks. What do we do? Like what's our next best alternative?
I would say we still, when we ran our analysis originally, we looked at the 4 industries within Crane, even before we got to the acquisition. And regardless of this deal or not, the valve industry, the fluid handling industry was the area that we identified as the best opportunity. And so if this deal were to fall through, I would still say we should be going back into that industry, whether it be through another acquisition or through some sort of growth within that industry, but still not backing away from the fact that that industry is our best opportunity to grow the company moving forward. We had 3 other companies that we identified as possible acquisitions. There's opportunities to grow within. That area is still the area to continue to attack and continue to try and grow with it. Specifically given the fact that the currency industry or the electronic payment industry just had a recent acquisition, and so it's not really one that's quite ready for us to make another big move in as Crane continues to get used to having Crane currency within the company. So I would say sticking within that fluid handling industry is still the right move.
As Carl mentioned before as well, there's been 26 acquisitions in the first quarter of this year alone in the fluid handling segment. So if this particular deal does not go through, our suggestion would be to immediately identify another alternative company and continue with this industry rollout.
So who is that? You said I think you looked at a few, right?
So Sun Hydraulics was actually a fairly comparable alternative to Circor. And frankly, the reason that we decided Circor was a better alternative was because of the values in the company. That's not necessarily something that we cannot overcome. Crane has very strong core values. If we were able to get to the table with the Sun Hydraulics management team and truly understand who they are as a company, it might provide us some other opportunities. It makes sense from a global market perspective. It made sense from the deal size. They're $1.3 billion market cap. That's something tangible that Crane could actually purchase. If you want to pull up a cash deal or cash allocation, so in our earnings report, we identified that we have $1.5 to $2 billion available to acquire companies until 2021. So that's well within that range and a feasible alternative.
I'd like to add to that I think our goal, as Matt mentioned, is to continue to grow the valve industry should it be another acquisition. And mainly it's with any company that could get us that global exposure. One of the leading pieces of evidence that we found was the growth that's expected for the global markets within the valve industry. Going back to that urbanization forecast that's coming, but Business Wire and the United Nations specifically are predicting that the urbanization of the world's population will grow 68%, but more importantly, 90% of that increase coming from those regions that we mentioned, Asia and Africa. Those UN projections of urbanization of urban dwellers, these are the numbers that they expect by 2050 in India, Nigeria, and China. So we believe any acquisition that could get us closer to having a stronger presence in those regions is what's going to help us achieve those numbers of that growth within the industry.
You guys just mentioned the value piece, and you actually mentioned it a bit in your presentation that Circor was a good fit value-wise. Can you explain a little further about why there's such a good alignment between Crane and Circor from a value perspective?
So aside from those values that we mentioned, it was almost surprising. It seemed like it was verbatim that the very values that Crane aligns with were the ones that Circor was aligning with one piece that stood out to us also is how the IEA has estimated that about 40% of the global CO2 emissions, we'll need 40% reduction to avoid a 2-degree increase in global warming. So this now presents a challenge for the valve industry to create more efficient products for the
Time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.